Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories like these. Now, let's get into today's story video. AITA for uninviting my cousins for my wedding for feeding info to my mom. I am an only child, 28 years old. My parents split when I was 12 because my father discovered my mother had cheated on him. My father was devastated by this. My parents were close friends who began dating when they were 17 years old. I played sports and my father was my coach, so I had a lot deeper connection with him than I had with my mother. I was supposed to spend 1 week at my mother's house and the following week at my father's, but I generally simply shut myself in my room at my mother's house. My father would usually leave me there, and I would get on my bike and ride the 2 kilometers back to his place. My mother would ask me questions and I would act as if she didn't exist. It became so terrible that attorneys were called in, believing my father was plotting to convert me against my mother. My father wanted me to spend time with my mother, but I was unable to do so. My mother attempted to put us in therapy, but I would just sit there till the time was over, without saying anything to her. My mother eventually gave up and let me live with my father. I haven't talked to my mother in 15 years. She would come to my games by herself. I would sometimes request that my father inform her that she needed to go. I didn't always realize she was there. She'd attempt to speak to me after that, and I'd go right by her. Except for a handful of my relatives who were about my age, I shut off her whole family. She came up at my high school graduation, and I requested a few of instructors to have her removed, which they did. She never dated anybody else, and she was still trying to reconcile with my father a few years before he died. Calling it the worst mistake of her life, she begged my father to forgive her. When my father died a few years ago, she attempted to attend the burial, and I confronted her outside and asked her to leave. My fiancée Rachel was with me when I did this, and my mother burst into tears when she found out we were engaged. Rachel presented herself as my fiancée. She couldn't believe I still despised her after all these years. So, last week, I got a letter from my mother with a hefty check. She said in the letter that she couldn't bear the thought of not being invited to her only child's wedding, that her whole family is upset because I cut them off, and that she had been keeping tabs on me all these years via my cousin's updates out of respect for me, but couldn't bear the thought of not being there at the wedding. I tore up the check and sent it back to the return address. She shouldn't have known my address since I keep her banned on all social media platforms. I phoned my cousins, who revealed that they had been keeping my mother up to date on my whereabouts since I was 14 years old. They gave her prom pictures, college updates, engagement photographs, and my address. I was so enraged that I informed them that they would no longer be invited to the wedding because I didn't want my mother to have access to it. Rachel thinks I've gone too far by not inviting my cousins and blocking off my mother's whole family as a result of her actions. AITA. Edit. The cheating was done with a teammate's father. This was quite humiliating for me, and it forced me to relocate. I lost friends as a result of this. Story 2. AITA for blowing up on my dad's GF for telling me to clean my bedroom. I, a 24-year-old female, have been living with my father and his girlfriend for the last 2 years. We get along quite well overall. My mother resides in another town and suffers from a mental illness. To cut a long story short, my mother will not get treatment or counseling, so I just visit her when I can and try to spend time with her. I'm aware she'll never recover, and it's been tough to live with. I've been coming to therapy for about a year, and although I've become better at dealing with it, it's still difficult. I've been struggling with this since I was around 20, but I've just recently begun to talk about it openly now that I'm in treatment. My father is aware of this, as is his girlfriend. This weekend, I went to see my mother. I love her with all of my heart, but it takes a lot of emotional energy to do so. She hears things, and she really feels that people are out to get her. In her thoughts, there are hackers, killers, and cops attempting to apprehend her. I won't go into depth, but I hope you get the concept. As a result, spending time with my mother is challenging. Every day is like a hazardous assignment for her. I have a good time and we do stuff together, but it still takes a lot of patience. When I returned tonight, Sunday evening, Dad's GF asked whether I was okay. Yes, I said. And don't leave your room like that when you go, she warned right away. This isn't the first time I've returned home, and it's the first thing she says to me, and I simply did. And silently, I began to weep. I wished I could stop, but I couldn't. For weeks, I cleaned my room every day. It was this one day since all of my energy was focused on going to see my mother because, as I previously said, it is extremely difficult. I don't believe it's all that significant. At least, not more crucial than my own mental wellness. And I've only just arrived home, where I should be able to unwind a little. She couldn't even give me a break, and I didn't even spend 5 minutes at home. So when she observed that I was weeping, I immediately told her everything. I told her she could have waited for me to calm down before informing me, or she could simply trust that I'd do it the next morning. I was going to do so. That what I'm doing is emotionally demanding, and that I'm only here for one day and should be able to unwind at home. That I have to accept that my mother will never recover, and that although I may seem to be okay on the outside, I am struggling every day on the inside. I told her all of this and more, but I tried not to offend her by being cautious with my words. But she seemed to be in pain, despite the fact that my argument was simply that I needed a little more patience and sensitivity. I told her I didn't want her to feel terrible, just to think about how difficult it may be for me. Before they went to bed, there was a lot of tension. I considered apologizing, but I didn't. I'm not sorry, it's how I felt, and I was attempting to explain how she made me feel. But I'm not sure whether I was too reasonable and dramatic. Or maybe she didn't grasp what I was saying. I'm not certain. Ada? Update. It's been about a month since I wrote this piece, and I wanted to provide an update. So several of you said that Dad's GF wanted me to leave the home. That is not correct, but it did make me wonder why she appeared to believe I wasn't helping enough, although I felt I was. I've observed that whenever I offer to help her, she always declines. When I ask, "Can I assist you with that?" the response is no. No. If I say, "I can purchase something for you," she always declines, regardless of what it is. So, after a few days, I asked her whether my remarks had harmed her. Bringing it up was unpleasant and tight, but I knew it was necessary. "Yes," she said, "because I was merely instructing you to clean your room, and you made me feel horrible." I stated much more gently this time that the issue wasn't expressing it, but rather that I wished she had waited a few minutes. Then I informed her that if she consistently declines my assistance, I'll assume she simply doesn't want me to. Her response was, "That's simply the way I am. I say no because I'm embarrassed. I'd prefer you do it just because you want to assist." I stated that I'm asking because I want to assist, but that from now on I won't ask and instead would simply do it. I've also observed that the majority of her leisure time is spent preparing all of the meals. I used to do part of the cooking as well, but since she was out of work for a while, she has taken over completely. So I volunteered to handle the meal so she could have some time to herself. After she agreed, I informed her that all I asked was that she take things slowly and allow me some space after I returned from seeing my mother. She seemed to be pleased with whatever I said. "I know I'm not your mother, but I try to treat you like you're my daughter," she said. I told her I was aware, that I appreciated it, and that I loved her. We exchanged hugs. It's been a couple weeks since then, and I believe we've reached a decent position. I've been doing the most of the housekeeping, and I believe she recognizes my desire to assist. Instead, something horrible occurred to my mom one day, and my dad's GF was really kind and allowed me slack off a little when I wasn't feeling well. I believe we now have a greater understanding of one another. They usually think I'm the dramatic one, but I'm the only one who initiates the uncomfortable talks. I discussed everything with my therapist, and she said I handled it pretty well, and she's really pleased with my overall improvement. I hadn't had the opportunity to speak with my father about it yet, but I was curious about his thoughts, so I may still do it. I'm hoping that as time goes on, I'll be able to better our relationships. I wanted to thank everyone who responded. Many of you expressed wonderful and compassionate things, which I much appreciate.